right, there was a bit of a transition there, but wow, was it worth it. Thank you, orchestra. That was absolutely beautiful. My heart was pumping, and I'm feeling it. I'm ready to go. Thank you, that was beautiful. Genesis was the name of that piece, I believe, and man, it's beautiful, very appropriate. Now, today we're going to do a couple of things we didn't do last night. So the first thing is we are going to do a question and answer, and there were some pretty intense questions. I said I wouldn't have an answer to that, but thankfully I don't have to answer the questions. Dr. Broy will take care of that for us. So I'm going to do two questions because they kind of go together, and then good luck answering them. So,
okay.
All right, here we go. What method was used to determine the 12,000-year-old date in some of those locations? Is there any organic material that would help with the carbon-14? The second question related to that. Regarding the 12,000-year dating of the event hypothesized, I think it's the Younger Dryas is what they're referring to. Mm-hmm. If one is denying the scientific evidence over the biblical narrative, what is the basis to prove the Bible is true if you can't prove it by science? It seems science is contradicting the Bible rather than proving it.
All right, those are some excellent questions, and some heavy ones too. The reason I didn't go into that last night is because when you start talking about C14 dating, that can be a whole weekend of discussion in and of itself.
Yes.
So I'm going to try to answer that in as few words as possible, so bear with me. In order to understand what C14 dating is, you're going to get an archaeologist explanation of this, not a physicist, so hopefully my physics is correct there. But what we're looking at is the ratio of C14 isotopes to regular C12 isotopes. So what happens is these galactic cosmic rays come in and hit our atmosphere and knock protons out of nitrogen atoms and create these isotopes, these C14 isotopes, because we count an element based on how many protons is in it, right? So when it knocks it out, it becomes carbon. And then that carbon, those isotopes bond with oxygen and make carbon dioxide. And then that carbon dioxide is absorbed by the plants during photosynthesis. And then all living things either directly or secondarily consume those plants. And so all living things have approximately the same amount of carbon-14 in their bodies that's in the atmosphere during the time they lived.
Okay.
So that's sort of where carbon-14 is coming from and how it gets into living things. And so when they die, that amount, that ratio the C14 starts to slowly deteriorate. By slowly, in about 5,700 years or so, half of that C14 will turn into regular carbon, essentially. And so they call that a half-life. And after so many years, then you can't detect it at all. But that's big time that we're talking about there. And so that's sort of what they're measuring.
Okay.
And when we look at historic periods, or I guess I should back up and say, sorry, I told you this is a bigger topic, trying to put it into fewer words. So the ratio of C14 to carbon in the atmosphere fluctuates. Lots of things can affect how much C14 is in the atmosphere. They discovered this in the 50s when they were blowing up bombs and everything and changing, what the makeup of the atmosphere. And so it needs to be calibrated. You need to know about how much C14 was in the atmosphere when that organism lived in order to be able to determine how much has been lost. It's like me trying to measure something, but I don't know where the beginning is, right? So C14 isn't quite like a ruler that you just measure and boom, you know what time period it is. It has to be calibrated. So for historic times, we can calibrate that with known data. So let's say that we have an inscription from an Egyptian pharaoh that says that I inscribed this, it doesn't say that, I'm paraphrasing, I inscribed this on the day that the dog star Sirius raised in Thebes. Way oversimplified, but you get that. Yeah. And so then we can tell astronomically, okay, that happened at about this year from that location, and so we kind of have a date. And then anything that's associated with that, then we know how much carbon-14 is in that material, and we can calibrate other things from around the same time period. Okay. It gets trickier when we go into the prehistoric material, for the obvious reason that we don't have anything to calibrate it against. It's prehistoric by its definition. And so then we try to calibrate these by geological dates. And that gets tricky, because how are those calibrated? How do we, for example, you have the layers in a lake and the sediment layers that accumulated over time. And so you have to assume, and this comes to the doctrine of uniformity, assuming that the natural environment that we experience today and the natural processes are the same now in the past as they were now. And so they might date the lake bed layers by cave formations, stalactites or stalagmites. But then there's a bit of circular reasoning, because how are those dated? And then those might be dated by another lake bed, or, so it kind of creates this loop, a self-affirming loop, so to speak, when it comes to these ancient dates. So those are absolute dates. We also have in archaeology what we call relative dating, and I don't know what I'm doing on my time here, but in relative dating, we compare the date of something compared to something else. So for example, when we're digging, we know that this is under this, so this is older than this, logically speaking, right? And so that's relative dating. We're comparing it to something else. And so we can tell, for example, at Göbekli Tepe, we were talking about that site, that some things at the site are not as old as other things based on the stratigraphy. And so that kind of dating is pretty reliable. But when we start putting a calendar date or year on it, it gets a little trickier.
Okay.
That's the short version. There's a lot more to it, like I said, but that's kind of hopefully that was a clear summation.
All right. Well, hopefully you understood that. That was good. All right, thank you very much. That was good, though. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it. All right, so we'll do 2 more questions.
Okay.
Have the mounds been scanned with LiDAR? I think he's talking about Göbekli Tepe.
Okay, so I don't know. LiDAR, I imagine probably so. What LiDAR will do is it'll give you 3-dimensional images of a space. We use it a lot in our Iron Age archaeology sites. So they probably have done that at Göbekli Tepe. What they've also done is ground-penetrating radar, a magnetometry, and that's how they can tell that there are at least 10 other enclosures at the site that they haven't excavated yet. They're down there, they can tell from the ground-penetrating radar. So maybe that's what they're referring to when they're talking about LiDAR.
Okay, perfect. And then this was actually from one of the kids that were there last night, and they said, what was the sighting stone in Göbekli Tepe?
Okay, so I believe what that's referring to is it's been identified as the place where the different constellations that particular analyst was looking at and saying, those different animals represent different constellations. And so I think that was the place that he was saying they would observe the rising and the eclipses and all those kinds of things from that point. Because when you're looking at astronomical things, you have to have a point of reference to observe them and record that. So I think that's what that sighting stone is.
Perfect. Now, we're going to switch really quickly to our giveaway section. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, the giveaways are going to people who filled out their response card last night. So if you want to receive a giveaway or be kind of in the drawing for a giveaway at 2 o'clock, please fill out a response card. So make sure to do that. Now, we're going to give away 4 gifts each day. And the gifts actually, like the first one's a cup, and it gets a little more intense. And the final gift at 7 o'clock tonight is actually a fairly expensive Land of the Bible, Bible. Yeah, that's how you'd say it, right? And so it's got tons of graphs and charts and historical evidence, and of course, it has the Bible. And so these are some awesome items that we're going to share. So the first person for the drawing is Debbie Pittman.
All right,
Debbie Pittman, where are you? Debbie, can you raise your hand and we'll have someone? Okay, over here. Perfect. Jonathan, could you? Thank you. Awesome. She's getting a cup. They have all Bible verses that I went and picked out for this. Our next winner, and I think that's going to be a Ty Gibson book. And I've actually read this book. It's a very powerful book, deep theology, but also very personable, for Roxy Olson. Roxy Olson.
Roxy.
Yeah, oh, Roxy's excited. Amen. All right, we'll bring that to her. Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, our next gift is actually a devotional, and I'm not sure, is that the Jesus Calling one?
Jesus Calling,
yes, we're going to do a
Sarah
Jesus
Young.
Calling by Sarah Young. Very powerful and meaningful devotional. And this is going to be for Connie Johnson.
All right, Connie.
All right, we're very excited. Good. They know each other, I can tell. This is good. Awesome. Very good. Now, this last one, we're going to do let's do the maps one. Yeah, that one, perfect, thank you. This is a kind of maps, it's got, what's it called?
Rose Book of Bible Charts, Maps, and Timelines. That is a handy reference tool
Yes,
there.
I looked through it and I was like, this is awesome. I need to get this for everybody. So this one will go to Joyce Williamson.
All right,
Joyce Williamson, very good. Awesome, friends, thank you. They were all like kind of hanging out together, it looks like. So I will now hand it over to you, so thank you so much.
All right, thank you. It is wonderful to be here. I'll tell you that music was incredible. You have so many talented musicians here. It was really a joy. I'm sure the courts of heaven are ringing with your music as you raise it up to God. It's such a tremendous act of worship and praise. It's really beautiful. All right, today we are talking about, am I plugged in correctly here? There we go. When the waters rose, and we're talking about Noah's flood. And we'll be taking it from a little bit different angle, maybe, than you're used to. We're not going to talk so much about, we don't have Noah's Ark to talk about that in an archaeological way. To give you a short hypothesis rundown on that one, if you imagine that Noah and his family have landed on a world, on a mountain, in a world that has been devastated by a global flood, there's not going to be a lot of mature wood and trees around, yet they obviously had carpentry skills. So the archaeological hypothesis, at least that I've discussed with my colleagues and whatnot, is that they probably dismantled the ark, to be honest, and reused that wood to build their houses and whatever structures they needed. That would be the most logical conclusion, but who knows? We have yet to actually locate Noah's Ark. But what we're going to talk about today is the flood story in different cultures and how it's remembered. But before we do that, I kind of want to orient you on the map, so you know where we're talking about. So last night, we were talking about some of the archaeological sites that were down here in this part of Turkey, in southeastern Turkey. And there are two traditional locations for Mount Ararat. Unfortunately, the Bible doesn't say Mount Ararat. It actually says the Mountains of Ararat, which is a region. And so it doesn't give us a specific location, but rather a mountain range. It's like, how do you call what's the close range here or something? You have the different, no, I know the Rocky Mountains, but I mean, you have the different ranges in the mountains, is what I meant, yeah. Yes, so you have the front range, and then, you have different areas of the mountains. And when you're from the area, they're familiar to you, right? And so it was the same in the days that these stories were recorded. The Mount Ararat that's listed here, this is just an image from Google Maps, Google Earth, right? I just grabbed this and clipped it here for you to see. So clearly Google goes with the mountain that is called in Turkish Agridagi, and in Agridagi, rather. I think I have a picture of it here for you. I'll go to in just a minute. I want you to see Mount Kudi or Mount Judy first. And the other location is at Mount Judy. And long story short, because we're short on time, the Mount Ararat location does have more historical evidence supporting it, whereas the Mount Judy location is probably secondary, I would say. We don't know for sure, but I prefer the Mount Ararat location based on the evidence that I've studied for what that's worth. And if you want more information on it, let me know afterwards. I'd be happy to forward you some articles that are really interesting on the topic. But here is Agridagi. There we go. And it's actually a double mountain. It's almost 17,000 feet tall, which is about 6,000 feet taller than any other mountain around in the area. And its Turkish name means mountain of pain, which is not very uplifting, Agridagi. Its Armenian name is Masis, and that just means twin. So that one's a little bit nicer anyway, rather than mountain of pain. But it's a very beautiful mountain, as you can see. And we're going to talk a little bit about the myths, like I said, around the flood in other cultures, and what we can learn by comparing those myths to the biblical account. That's just sort of to give you an idea of where we're heading. And we're going to start with, this is the outer shrine of Tutankhamun. How many of you have heard of King Tut? Most people have, right? So when they found his tomb, this was the outer layer. They would layer the shrines, they called them, and so it was like a small room, and then inside of that was another one, and then, there would be multiple sarcophaguses, and so, it's like almost like the nesting dolls kind of thing, where you just have one layer inside of the other. And this is the outer shrine. It filled up almost the entire room, and on the inside walls of this shrine is a story, and it's part of a larger book that's been called the Book of the Celestial Cow. Egyptian literature has such fascinating names, right? The Book of the Celestial Cow. And in that book is the story that's called the destruction of mankind. This is not what we would consider a traditional flood story necessarily, but it covers a lot of the same ideas. So the story goes that Ra, the main chief deity, is getting old and he's getting tired. And so humanity decides that they're going to try to overthrow him. They're going to form a rebellion and not serve Ra anymore. And so Ra gets the other gods together and he's like, what are we going to do about this? This is ridiculous. I'm ad-libbing and paraphrasing here, but this is essentially what he says. And so the gods say, well, you should send your eye after him. Now, the deified eye of Ra, you may have seen it pictured before, and this time it can change shape. This goddess can change shape, and she is first in the form of Hathor, the cow goddess, who is a nurturing and supportive goddess, but she changes into Sekhmet, who is this destroying lioness goddess. And she goes on this rampage and starts destroying humanity, and all night long she's just being so vicious and swift and enjoying it so much in her destruction of mankind that Ra repents. And he's like, wow, maybe I shouldn't have done that. She's going to literally kill everybody. And of course, the gods are dependent on humans for a lot of things like food and this type of thing, which we'll talk a little bit more about this afternoon. And so they try to stop Sekhmet, and she won't be stopped. The bloodlust is there, and she just wants to rip everything apart. And so the gods devise this brilliant plan where they are going to, Ra has them collect some beer and then get some red ochre from elephantine and mash it up. It's like a powder, right? And mix it in with the beer so the beer looks like blood. And then they flood the fields with this. And when Sekhmet gets up to go on her next rampage, she sees it, and she, in her bloodlust, drinks it all up, and then she gets too drunk to destroy anybody, and humanity is saved. It's kind of a weird story, right? Saved by beer. Who would have thought? It's kind of a reverse flood myth, but it has a lot of the same elements in it. This is a small cuneiform fragment of a tablet, and it tells a portion of the Epic of Atrahasis. Atrahasis is the Babylonian flood myth that predecessed or came before the Gilgamesh Epic. And this is a small one. It's originally a 3-tablet epic, and this is the oldest example that is datable, and a surviving text with this epic on it. 2 of the tablets are at the British Museum, and the 3rd is at the Morgan Library and Museum in New York. So there you have the 3 tablets kind of spread across the world right now. This set of tablets dates to about 1635 BC, and it tells the story of the pantheon, the Babylonian pantheon, and how they had their work structured. And so the greater gods relied on the lesser gods to do all of the work. The lesser gods were called the Igigi, more fun names, right? And so the Igigi are doing all the work, and they start complaining about this. They said, we don't want to do all the work. This is too much work. It's not fun. It's too hard. The work. And so what are we going to do to solve this problem of not wanting to do all the work? And so then brilliantly, the god of wisdom comes and says, well, maybe we should make mankind, and then they can do all the work for us. And so they get together, and they get the goddess who's known by many names. My favorite is Mommy, because it's just so fitting. She's the womb goddess, and her name is Mommy. It's actually M-A-M-I, but it sounds like Mommy. And he uses her, he compels her to help him in this project. And so she takes some clay and she pinches off 14 pieces, and she has her helper womb goddesses to take this clay and nurture it, incubate it, or whatever, while she gives this incantation that it says she got so tired of it, but the God of wisdom kept pushing her. Come on, you got to keep giving the incantation until your work is complete. And so she did. And finally, in the end, she creates 7 pairs, or 14 human beings, 7 males and 7 females, and they are the first of mankind. And there's this indication that there's this, when they're created, when their life begins, there's this thrumming sound, right? That it implies that there's this heartbeat. And after some time passes, the god of the earth, Enlil, gets really tired of this thrumming, right? This heartbeat that humanity has. They multiply, and now there's a lot of heartbeats, and it's just really noisy, and it's keeping him from sleeping. And he's just really irritated by it. And so he sends a famine, or he sends a plague first, I think. And he sends a plague, and he tries to wipe out humanity with a plague. But humanity is resilient, and some of them die, but there's still a lot. And 600 years later or so, this thrumming is waking him up and keeping him from his sleep. And so he goes through the whole cycle again, and he sends a famine, and he parches the land, and so they are, or a drought. I'm sorry, I'm getting all in confused order. I'm just messing you guys up, I know. But he sends first the plague, then the drought, and then last the famine. And so we go through this whole cycle 3 times, and each time humanity comes back, and their noise, just the noise of their very existence, right, is the implication here, are keeping them up, is keeping him up at night. And so he devises this plan that he is going to wipe out all of humanity with a global flood. And he swears all the other gods to secrecy and say, you can't tell anybody. We're gonna do this. I'm gonna wipe them all out, and then finally we'll have some peace and quiet. And so the gods all make this vow. But there was one man by the name of Atrahasis in this story, and he had a special connection with a special god, Enki, or Ea, depends on which one you read. And Enki was the god of the fresh water underneath the earth, sort of that watery abyss under the earth kind of idea, the fountains of the deep, as we might read in the Bible. And so he was the god of that fresh water, the spring water. And he was close. He was also the god of wisdom. And he was close with Atrahasis, and they listened to one another. And so Enki could not stand the idea of his friend Atrahasis being destroyed by this flood. So he kind of secretly takes him aside, and he's like, you've got to, build a boat and save yourself. And so in this story, in this particular myth, the story of the flood isn't quite as embellished, I should say, as it is in its later version in the Epic of Gilgamesh, or the Gilgamesh Epic. This is a tablet that's also at the British Museum. They have all the good stuff, they really do. They have a lot of cool stuff. I'd love to spend more time at the British Museum. But this particular tablet, was found as part of the collection of the library of Ashurbanipal, one of the Assyrian emperors. And it was from Nineveh, of course, which is in modern-day Iraq. And it was found and delivered to the British Museum back in the 1800s. And the curator refers to it now as the single most popular and influential of the cuneiform texts, the most famous. It was first translated in 1872 by a man named George Smith. And George Smith, for you young people in particular, should be inspiring. He made banknotes. He was a banknote engraver. That was his day job. But he had a passion for Assyriology. And so he taught himself cuneiform and Akkadian and Sumerian and taught himself how to read these things. It's amazing what you can do without television, right? And so he eventually got a job working for the British Museum as a translator of these tablets. They had more tablets than they knew what to do with, and so one of his jobs was to translate these tablets. And one day, in 1872, he translated this story, and he was so excited about it that the story goes, he got up and started shouting, "I'm the first one to have read this after 2,000 years of oblivion." And so he was so excited about it, and that he started running around and for some inexplicable reason started stripping off his clothes. He was so excited, he just couldn't be contained by his clothes any longer, apparently. But he became a sensation all around Britain, and the newspaper actually decided to sponsor him to go and look for more fragments, because at that time they didn't have the complete epic. And so he went on another expedition to Nineveh, and it was like a needle in a haystack, but somehow he found more fragments, and he brought them back, and it was just a wonderful celebration there to have that complete story. Unfortunately, his story didn't end well. On his third expedition, he got sick and he died, because it was the 1800s, unfortunately. And so it was, those kinds of things happened with a lot more frequency. But because of him and these efforts, we have this story now, and you get to read some of it, at least translated into English today. So it kind of picks up, or I'm going to pick it up with you, at the story of the flood. And in the Gilgamesh Epic, it's actually Utnapishtim, who is the name, instead of the Atrahasis, it's Utnapishtim, who is the Noah-like character. And he is the one who hears from Enlil from Enki, that Enlil is sending this flood. And so he says, "I have learned that Enlil is hostile to me. Therefore, I will go down to the deep and dwell with my lord Ea." This is the god who's friends with him. And then it describes how he builds this boat. I've kind of summarized it here for you. "All of my family and kin I made go aboard the ship. The beasts of the field, the wild creatures of the field, I made go aboard. The stated time had arrived. He who orders the unease at night showers down a rain of blight. I watched the appearance of the weather. The weather was awesome to behold. I boarded the ship and battened up the entrance. With the first glow of dawn, a black cloud rose up from the horizon. Adad turned to blackness all that had been light. The land was shattered like a pot. The storm blew, gathering speed as it blew, submerging the mountains, overtaking the people like a battle. No one can see his fellow, nor can the people be recognized from heaven. The gods were frightened by the deluge." I just think that's so, and then it goes on to describe how terrified even the gods were of this storm that had been unleashed. "Ishtar cried out like a woman in labor. How could I speak evil, ordering battle for the destruction of my people, when it is I myself who gave birth to my people?" So she's there mourning that she took part in this conspiracy of the gods to get rid of humanity. "The gods, all humbled, sat and wept. The flood-carrying south storms subsided in the battle, which it had fought like an army. The sea grew quiet. The tempest was still. The flood ceased. I looked at the weather. Stillness had set in, and all of humankind had returned to clay. The landscape was as level as a flat roof. I opened a hatch, and light fell on my face. Bowing low, I sat and wept. I sent forth and set free a dove, but it came back, since no resting place for it was visible. Then I sent forth and set free a swallow," and it goes through the same repetitive pattern, "and a raven. And then at last he offers a sacrifice. The gods smelled the sweet savor. The gods crowded like flies around the sacrifice. Let the gods come to the offering, but let not Enlil come to the offering." He's the one who instigated this whole mess, right? "For he, unreasoning, brought on the deluge, and my people consigned to destruction. When at last Enlil arrived and saw the ship, Enlil was angry. He was filled with wrath over the gods. Has some living soul escaped? he declares. Now, eventually, the other gods talk him down and say, okay, but if you kill all the humans, who's going to give us food? And we're going to starve to death. And so the Babylonian gods are dependent upon mankind for their nourishment. And so they eventually come to an agreement, as they do in the Epic of Atrahasis, to limit mankind, not destroy them. And so things like infertility are listed as being sent by the gods to make sure that the population doesn't grow too much. And that there's even some tablets that talk about 1/3 of the babies dying so that there's some population controls. So this was one way for them to understand these events within the divine sphere. But what's interesting to our discussion of the biblical flood is the motivations that brought the gods to this point. Because this perception of God in the flood affects our interpretation of the story, even from the Bible. So to sum up here, some of these statements from the Gilgamesh Epic that kind of give us that indication of why the flood was sent. Enlil is hostile to me. He's unreasoning. He consigned to destruction all of the human beings. He was angry, and he was filled with wrath, right? Why has any soul escaped from my attempts to destroy them all? And so when we read the flood story, and I get this question a lot from my students that come and talk to me and from people I have discussions with, they can't understand how God would destroy all except for Noah and his family. Like, how is that the loving God we know? It just seems like such an angry, bitter act, much like what we see in some of these ancient myths where they were clearly interpreting God's action that way as well. But I want us to turn, we're in Genesis 6, and kind of look there at how the Bible describes the situation that led up to the flood. It says, starting in verse 5, "The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." Can we imagine that even? I mean, our world is pretty bad, but I think most of us have some good thoughts anyway, right? But at this point, every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord mourned that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. Now the earth, it says there in verse 11, was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. So as we're looking just at this passage here, where's the anger and the wrath? Is anybody seeing that? In fact, we have very different verbs. It might say regret in your Bible, but the Hebrew word there is the idea of mourning. God mourned that he had made the earth. We see the same Hebrew word used in Genesis 24:67 when Isaac loses his beloved wife, and in chapter 38, verse 12, when Isaac loses his mother, Jacob loses his wife. Well, I apologize there. It's a kind of mourning that is similar to when we use the word of mourning a lost loved one. If any of you have ever experienced that longing for the person that you have lost to death, if you've ever lost a loved one, you know a little bit of what that feeling was that God was experiencing. That's what's being described here, this mourning for the loss. And it grieved him to his heart. This is literally, his heart was broken. God's heart was broken when he looked down at earth and saw how the beautiful creation and all the wonderful people that he had made in such a short time had come to that state. Because that's what sin is. Sin is destructive. When we rebel against the God of life, against our Creator, it destroys us and everything around us. That's what sin does. When God said, if you eat of that tree, you will die, he wasn't exaggerating. That's the consequence, the result of sin. That's what sin does to everyone around. But when we're thinking about this question of why did God have to destroy everything with a flood, I have another quote here. This is from Patriarchs and Prophets, and it tells us that humanity came to regard human life with astonishing indifference. So we have a situation where evil is the intention of human thoughts continually, all of the time. The earth was corrupt, which means destroyed, broken, ravaged, ruined, and it was filled with violence, and we understand that astonishing indifference for human life. I think we have enough of some of those things in our world today that we can participate here in a quick thought experiment. What would have happened if there hadn't have been a flood? Do any of you know the Robert Frost poem, Fire and Ice, right? Some say the world will end in fire. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But some, I messed it up. Let me try again. Some say the world will end in fire. Some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. Because sin leads to destruction, be it in fire or in ice, as Robert Frost is trying to put in the poetic verse, right? When we have mankind's thoughts are only evil continually, I think we know enough of violence and of hate in our world even today that we can imagine how self-destructive mankind would be. You read the news headlines, and there's all sorts of things about we're going to be wiped off the planet. We're going to wipe ourselves off the planet, right? In lots of different ways, or depending on which news story you read. But that's now when we're still having good thoughts. So imagine a world peopled by those whose thoughts are only evil continually and have an astonishing indifference for human life. It's not a great leap, I think, to imagine that if God hadn't intervened, we would have destroyed ourselves. And the problem with that, other than, the annihilation of the human species, is the concept of God's promise. Because God is always faithful to fulfill his promises. That's part of who he is. He is faithful and trustworthy. And he promised Adam and Eve at the very beginning that he would send his son to fix this mess, right? The seed of the woman would come and help restore us, to free us from this bondage into slavery that we had gotten ourselves into. And if God hadn't sent the flood, he wouldn't have been able to fulfill that promise. We know from Noah's preaching how many people would have responded to the Messiah if God had sent his Messiah then, right? Other than Noah and his family, nobody else got on the ark, and everybody was welcome. So clearly, that wasn't the right moment to send the Messiah. And if you look at sort of the aftermath of the flood, we were looking at Göbekli Tepe and some of these sites that were not long after the flood. We don't know exactly how long after the flood they were, but they weren't all that long after the flood. And the fear and the issues that they had that soon after the flood, clearly Noah and his family weren't quite there in their connection with God either. That the time needed to be right. And only God knows all of the reasons why the time when he sent his son was the right time. But we always know, we can always trust in the fact that God is love. The Bible says it over and over again, directly, indirectly, through stories and illustrations of how he is a God of love and justice. He defends the defenseless, and he loves us so much. And that's the same God whose heart was broken, who grieved the loss of his children and the catastrophe that had to come in the flood. So you have your card, and on that there's a place for your response. And today I want you to think about how you want to respond to this God of love. Are you going to put your trust in him and get onto that metaphorical ark? Let him lead your life If that's your response today, then you can indicate it in your heart and also on your card.
So as you're thinking about that and writing down your response, look through. If you have any questions, fill them out. And we actually have our deacons, if they can come up, and they will hand out little baskets. This is the chance for the church members here. If you want to return your tithe and offering, this is the chance to do that. And if you're a guest here, we're just thankful you're here. And Dr. Broy came here to share this awesome information with us. So be sure to fill that out and ask your questions. As the deacons are going down, the orchestra will get ready. We'll have one more amazing musical number from them, and then Dr. Broy will give us a benediction. At that point, you can then go to the potluck, which we've prepared for you, and I hope you enjoy that, and we will see you at 2 o'clock. God bless you.